The subway entrance was a yawning black void, its metal gates rusted and bent out of shape. A grim wind blew from within, carrying the scent of rot and mildew that clung to the walls like a second skin. I stood at the top of the steps, gripping the flashlight like it was a lifeline. The wall needed the maintenance parts stashed somewhere in the subway system, but no one volunteered for this run. I could guess why. The stories of what lurked below weren't just campfire tales. They were warnings. I adjusted the straps of my pack, feeling the weight of the knife at my hip and the crowbar across my back. The tools felt inadequate, like trying to fight a hurricane with a stick. My face still ached with every step, the twisted smile carved into my cheeks, stretching painfully. I ignored it. Pain was nothing compared to the possibility of leaving the wall vulnerable. The first step down sent a chill up my spine. The air here was heavier, thicker, like it had been trapped for decades. My boots echoed against the cracked tiles as I descended further, the dim light from above shrinking with every step. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, but barely. The shadows seemed alive, shifting and stretching in the periphery of my vision. The station was a tomb. Trash littered the ground, discarded newspapers, shattered bottles, remnants of a world long gone. Faint graffiti scrawled across the walls, faded by time, whispered stories of desperation and madness. The tracks were slick with grime and stagnant water, the faint smell of decay lingering in the air. I stepped carefully, the silence pressing in on me. Then I heard it, a faint whisper. It was so soft I almost missed it, carried on the wind like a fleeting breath. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, the flashlight trembling in my hand. It wasn't the wind. The sound was too deliberate, too human. I turned the beam toward the direction of the sound, illuminating a crumbling bench and a pile of debris. Nothing moved, but the whisper came again, this time closer. Sonny. I stiffened. It wasn't possible. The voice was too familiar. It sounded like Evan, one of the men who didn't make it back from a supply run months ago. I had seen his torn, lifeless body myself. "You're hearing things," I muttered under my breath, my voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. But my hands trembled, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. Still, I pressed on, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes they were fragments of sentences, disjointed and garbled, like radio static. Other times, they were clear. Too clear. "Sonny, why did you leave me?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself forward. I wouldn't let this place get to me. Not yet. The flashlight beam swept across the floor, catching glimmers of something wet. Blood. It was fresh, a thick trail leading down the platform and into a tunnel. My stomach churned, but I followed it. Every step felt like walking deeper into a nightmare. As I neared the tunnel's entrance, the whispers shifted. They weren't just one voice anymore. They were many, overlapping, a haunting chorus. Some sounded angry, others wept. A few laughed, the sound broken and hollow. The blood trail ended abruptly at a pile of bones, stripped clean, their surfaces gnawed and splintered. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth as bile rose in my throat. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I swore I saw movement in the tunnel ahead, a flicker of shadow, a brief gleam of something reflective, like an eye catching the light. A shuffling sound echoed from the darkness, slow and deliberate. My pulse quickened as I backed away, the beam of the flashlight shaking as I scanned the tunnel. That's when I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with its strings cut. Its flesh was pale, almost translucent, with black veins webbing its body. Its mouth hung open, emitting a low, guttural moan, but its eyes locked onto mine with a predatory hunger. Then it spoke. "Sonny," it rasped, its voice distorted but unmistakable. It wasn't just imitating Evan. It was Evan, or what was left of him. The fragmented memories of a man I had once known twisted into this abomination. I froze as it staggered closer, its mouth twitching, releasing a burst of whispers in overlapping tones. My name repeated over and over, each iteration a little more desperate, a little more deranged. My feet finally obeyed, and I turned, sprinting back toward the station. The moans and whispers followed me, growing louder, more chaotic, as more shadows emerged from the tunnel. The flashlight caught glimpses of them. half-rotted faces, flesh peeling away to reveal the blackened, fungal-like tissue beneath. Their mouths moved incessantly, releasing fragmented phrases that echoed through the station. "Don't leave me. It hurts. Sonny, come back." I stumbled, my knee slamming into the ground, pain flaring up my leg. The flashlight tumbled out of my hand, spinning wildly as it hit the floor. In its flickering light, I saw the echoes closing in, their movements synchronized, their glowing eyes fixed on me. Desperation surged through me. I grabbed the flashlight, scrambling to my feet, and bolted for the emergency stairwell. The whispers grew louder, deafening, as if they were inside my head. My heart pounded as I reached the stairs, nearly slipping on the slick tiles. I threw myself into the stairwell, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved, every breath a struggle as I pressed my back against the cold metal. The whispers didn't fade. They were right outside the door, relentless and unyielding. And then, the faint sound of scratching began. The door buckled under the weight of the echoes slamming against it, their whispers now a chaotic symphony of torment. The sound wasn't just external, it seemed to crawl into my skull, each word clawing at my sanity. My hands trembled as I jammed the crowbar through the door's handle, creating a makeshift lock. It wouldn't hold for long. My flashlight flickered, the bulb dimming as if the batteries were giving up just like the rest of me. The stairwell was a narrow, claustrophobic shaft with cracked walls and broken railings that spiraled endlessly downward. The only light came from the faint glow of my dying flashlight and the occasional flicker of emergency bulbs, their light barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The whispers grew louder, closer, as the echoes scraped at the door. "Sonny." My name stretched, distorted, like a broken recording. "Why did you leave us? Why didn't you help us?" I shook my head, trying to drown out their voices, but they only grew more insistent. My hands fumbled as I dug into my pack, pulling out spare batteries for the flashlight. My fingers slipped, the batteries clattering to the ground and rolling into the shadows. A surge of panic hit me as I scrambled to grab them, the whispers pressing closer, the door creaking under the pressure of the echo's assault. The moment I replaced the batteries, the door burst open with a deafening crash. I didn't dare look back. I bolted down the stairs, my boots pounding against the metal as the echoes poured into the stairwell. Their voices echoed, overlapping in a sickening harmony. "Come back. Don't leave us. We need you." I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The echoes were flooding down the stairs, their movements twitchy and erratic, their glowing eyes fixed on me. Some were missing limbs, dragging themselves along with jagged, exposed bone. Others were horribly bloated, their bodies pulsating as blackened veins stretched taut beneath their translucent skin. But the worst part was their faces, those rotting masks of familiarity, speaking in voices that were almost human. My flashlight caught one directly in its face. Its jaw was slack, the remnants of words bubbling out of its throat. Its voice cracked. "Help me, Sonny. Please." It sounded like Emma, a friend I'd lost months ago to an ambush. I stumbled, nearly falling, but forced myself to keep moving. The stairwell twisted and turned, each flight feeling like an eternity. The air grew colder, heavier, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The walls were damp, the faint stench of mold mixing with the sickly sweet rot of the echoes. My lungs burned as I gasped for air, my legs threatening to give out. At the bottom of the stairs, I burst into another tunnel. This one was different, narrower, with low ceilings that forced me to crouch slightly. The whispers followed, now accompanied by the wet, slapping sound of feet against the ground. The echoes didn't stop. They didn't slow. I scanned the tunnel frantically, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the shadows. Up ahead, I saw it. A maintenance room, its rusted metal door slightly ajar. I sprinted toward it, my breath ragged, the whispers clawing at my ears. As I reached the door, an echo lunged from the side, its skeletal hand swiping at my arm. I twisted away, driving the flashlight's base into its skull with a sickening crunch. It crumpled, but three more surged forward, their distorted voices crying out in anger. I slipped into the maintenance room, slamming the door shut behind me and bracing it with my crowbar. My chest heaved as I scanned the room. It was small, cramped, lined with shelves of rusted tools and broken equipment. The air was damp, the walls streaked with black mold. In the corner, I spotted a flare gun, my salvation. The whispers outside the door grew louder, their words turning into guttural screams. The echoes clawed at the metal, their nails screeching against the surface, leaving deep gouges. I grabbed the flare gun, fumbling with the single flare loaded inside. My hands shook as the door buckled again, the metal groaning under the relentless assault. Then, silence. The sudden absence of noise was deafening. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to hear. Nothing. Just the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. I stepped back from the door, the flare gun raised, every muscle in my body coiled like a spring, and then I heard it. A soft, familiar voice. "Sonny, please open the door." I froze. It was my mother's voice. Perfectly clear, perfectly real. My stomach twisted, my mind racing. It wasn't possible. She'd been gone for years, long before the world fell apart. "Sonny." The voice cracked, breaking into a sob. "Don't leave me again. Please." My hands trembled, the flare gun wavering as I stepped closer to the door. My throat felt dry, my chest tight. Logic screamed at me to stay back, but my feet moved on their own. The door creaked as I pulled it open just an inch, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the crack. For a moment, I saw nothing but shadows. Then an eye appeared. Milky white, set in a face twisted with decay. Its lips curled back, revealing jagged teeth as it hissed, lunging at the door. I slammed it shut, the force of the impact reverberating through my arms. The echoes howled, their voices rising into a cacophony of rage and despair. The door shook violently, the metal straining under their weight. With no time left, I grabbed the flare gun, aimed it at the door, and pulled the trigger. The flare exploded outward, punching through the thin metal and igniting the air with a burst of blinding red light. The screams outside turned to shrieks as the echoes recoiled, their flesh blistering and smoking in the intense heat. I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I grabbed the crowbar, pried open a maintenance hatch in the floor, and climbed down into the dark, my pulse pounding, the whispers still echoing in my mind. The ladder groaned under my weight, each rung slick with grime and rust as I descended into the abyss. My arms burned, my chest heaving with every strained breath. But the whispers above hadn't faded. They were louder now, more frenzied, echoing down the shaft with a maddening clarity. "Sonny, you can't leave us. Come back. We miss you. Why are you running?" The words clawed at my resolve, each voice more familiar than the last. My mother's soft, pleading tone. Evan's broken cries. Emma's haunting laugh. They sounded real, too real. My mind screamed that it wasn't possible, but the voices burrowed deep, making me doubt. Finally, my boots hit solid ground. The flashlight beam swept across the narrow tunnel, illuminating wet walls coated in patches of thick, black mold. The air down here was worse. Oppressive and sour, thick with rot and decay. My throat tightened as I forced myself to keep moving. There was no going back. The whispers quieted, replaced by a deeper, suffocating silence. Each step echoed like a gunshot, the sound bouncing off the narrow walls. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic plink, plink, plink filling the void like a grim metronome. I kept the flare gun clutched tightly in my hand, the single spent cartridge discarded, leaving me with just the blunt weight of the empty weapon. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, an old maintenance depot with a high ceiling that felt like a cavern. My flashlight flickered, its beam struggling to pierce the darkness. The space was filled with broken down machinery and scattered debris. But it was what lay in the center that froze me in place. A pile of bodies. They were stacked haphazardly, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, faces frozen in expressions of terror. Some were rotting, their skin sloughing off in strips, while others looked freshly dead, their eyes wide and unseeing. But what made my blood turn to ice was that some of them moved, not fully. Just small, twitching motions. Fingers curling and uncurling. Mouths opening and closing soundlessly. It was as if they were trapped in a grotesque limbo, half dead but fully aware. A faint shuffle behind me snapped my attention back. I spun around, the flashlight jerking in my hand. The tunnel behind me was empty. But the whispers began again, soft and low, like a breeze carrying fragmented sentences. "Sonny, you can't escape us. Why did you leave us behind? Join us." The flashlight's beam flickered, and for a split second, I saw them. The echoes, standing at the edge of the chamber, their glowing eyes piercing through the dark. They didn't move, but their mouths did, the whispers spilling out in overlapping chaos. My pulse quickened as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the debris-strewn floor. One of them stepped forward, its movement jerky and unnatural, the sound of wet flesh scraping against bone filling the silence. It raised a decayed hand, pointing directly at me. Its mouth opened wider, and the voice that came out wasn't fragmented. It was crystal clear. "Sonny, don't you remember me?" It wasn't a question. It was a command, a demand for recognition. My flashlight flickered again, and I saw its face, if you could call it that. Its skin was stretched too tightly over its skull, the flesh peeling away in places to reveal jagged bone. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow hue, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile as it spoke again. "You left me to die." I didn't know who it was mimicking, but the accusation hit me like a blow. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I backed away, my boots slipping on the damp floor. More echoes stepped forward, emerging from the shadows like living nightmares. Their movements were slow, deliberate, but their whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with an almost deafening cacophony. I turned and ran, the light bouncing wildly in my hand as I pushed through the debris, heading for an old maintenance corridor on the far side of the chamber. The whispers followed, echoing off the walls, their tone shifting from pleading to enraged. "You can't leave. You're one of us. Stay." I slammed into the corridor, my shoulder clipping the edge of the doorway. The narrow walls pressed in around me, and the whispers seemed to vibrate through the very air. My legs burned as I sprinted through the dark, the flashlight flickering like it was giving up. My chest heaved, the damp air clawing at my lungs. Suddenly a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing my arm. I screamed, swinging the flashlight wildly, the beam catching the twisted, rotting face of an echo. Its eyes glared into mine as it hissed, its breath hot and foul. I drove the flashlight into its skull, the sickening crunch of bone breaking beneath the impact. The echo crumpled, but its whispers didn't stop. Even as it lay twitching on the ground, its voice rasped, "Sonny, you can't leave." I stumbled forward, adrenaline the only thing keeping me moving. The corridor twisted and turned, disorienting me further, until I finally saw it, a ladder leading up. My heart leapt, hope flickering like a dying flame. The whispers surged behind me, closer now, their voices overlapping in a haunting, furious symphony. I reached the ladder, grabbing the rungs and hauling myself up. The metal was slick with condensation, my hands slipping as I climbed. Below, the echoes gathered at the base, their glowing eyes staring up at me. One of them started climbing, its decayed hands gripping the rungs, pulling itself up with jerking motions. I climbed faster, my muscles screaming in protest. The echo's hand shot up, grabbing my ankle. I kicked out, the force of the blow sending it tumbling back into the darkness. The others swarmed, their moans rising into a guttural roar as I climbed higher, finally reaching the top. I threw myself onto the floor, slamming the hatch shut behind me. My chest heaved as I crawled backward, my ears ringing with the whispers that still seemed to echo in my mind. The subway was behind me now, but its horrors clung to me like a second skin. Back at the wall, I sat alone, the tremor in my hands refusing to subside. I pulled out the battered notebook and wrote the words with unsteady strokes. Rule 10. Listen to the whispers. They're not in your head. I stared at the words for a long time, the whispers still scratching at the edges of my mind. I would never forget what I heard down there, or what I saw.